Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to start a new chapter, that is identifying and selecting systems development projects. In fact, whenever it is required to develop some project, some information systems project, normally the analysts, the managers, or the stakeholders, or the authorities from the top management, they look at the system from different perspectives. So they may come up with different types of possibilities to solve a problem. Now here comes whenever there are alternative solutions for the same problem, then you have to do some analysis of each solution, each alternative for that problem. So you would have to identify, you will have to select one of them, because at one time normally it is expected that one information system is developed by the one developing team, but if there is another developing team, they may consider developing some alternative solutions. However, all these things, it depends on decision making. They need to keep in mind what are the requirements of the users, what are the requirements of the systems. They have to also keep in mind when identifying and selecting different projects, what are the constraints, what are the obligations, what are the obstacles that they may face during the systems development. So you can see some learning objectives from this chapter. If you look at this figure, you can see that the whole loop is representing systems development life cycle, where the first phase is planning, the second is analysis, design, implementation, and maintenance. So in fact, we are still at the planning stage. Now during this planning, we have to identify certain projects and select one of them which is most suitable, meets the requirements, and do not violate the constraints. So we go further. So there are different steps. The first step is to identify. So identifying potential development projects from the stakeholder side. Stakeholders can be which they do have direct interest in the system, who are expecting benefits from the system. So they can identify that this is the problem where we want to develop a system. For example, let's take a very simple example. You guys go to the supermarket, right? Now supermarket, there are variety of items available. Until now, do you think, is there any supermarket or any organization that also have online delivery? Normally for shopping, what do you have to do? You go there, take a card, put your items from the shelf into the cart, take it to the cashier, and then pay for it. But if we want to develop a system that can also serve the customers while sitting at home, so I think, or you will agree with this, that this online purchase for that particular supermarket or a company can enhance their business, and stakeholders may be interested in developing such project if, only if the requirements are met properly and they do not violate their constraints. If any one of you do not understand what constraints are, please let me know. Constraint is a parameter which do not allow you to move freely, to decide freely. You always have to keep in mind that whenever I need to decide something, I must keep in mind what are the constraints. Right? So for example, financial budget is always a limiting value. It's not unlimited. So this means it's one kind of constraint while developing a project. Similarly, if I do not have particular skill, if I do not have a particular expert that is required, so that means it is a constraint for me. So I should start my project in a way that in simple words, for whom all the expertise are available. Similarly, time is another constraint. When you have to finish a certain project within a given limit of time. So stakeholders, they may identify. Now, project identification can be two ways. It can either be from the top management or from the bottom. If the project is identified from the top sources, then projects are, or by the diverse kind of steering committee, they do have certain characteristics. So for example, chief executives, directors of the company, they may initiate some projects. They may identify that we are facing problems in organizing or managing information systems in this or that area in a company. So they may identify, but sometimes suggestions are given by the bottom, from the bottom level, like floor managers. The problems what they are facing. For instance, you can, as a students from the lower levels, you can identify that we are facing this or that problem in handling or meeting up the services. You can initiate, you can identify that this is the area where we need attention. So that can take some time, step by step. That can go to the higher management, and they can look into that the problem is really genuine. They can approve it and start working on it. Sometimes it is already started from the top. So which one is better way, by the way? From bottom, it is, they are those people who are actually going to use the system. They are end users. But if it is identified from the top, approval in that case is more faster. That is more wider. Maybe as a student, if you want to develop a system that can only be possibly developed only for your department, you may not have an approval for other department or for other faculties. But if a project is identified by the top management of the university, let's say by the vice president or president, then they have since greater vision, so they can employ the project throughout all the faculties of the college. So there are some characteristics. So we can see that top management can or can identify the projects. They may have greater strategic focus, how to handle with these with this kind of projects. What are the expectations they direct from the top? They are largest project size. They can be longest project duration. But the projects identified from the bottom, they can be small in size, they can be short in duration, but they can be more requirements. I mean, in those projects which are identified by the lower level, they may be more precise what they are looking for. They better understand the problems, the constraints. Okay. Now, suppose there are certain projects which are identified. We need to select one of them. This selection should be made based on a certain criteria, right? I mean, it's not like we randomly select one of the project and say, yes, this is the good alternate solution for us to solve the problem. Let's go ahead. No. We do have to, I mean, it requires certain analysis. For instance, before selection, we have to classify them. We have to rank them. Once we are able to rank those alternate solutions, we can say, since this is the highest rank, so we can select this project. Or since this is the lowest rank identified project, so this is less important for us. Highest rank may be the highest important for us. Now, there are certain criteria. For instance, if you look, this ranking of the projects after after identifying them is based on certain criteria. For example, value chain analysis is one of the criteria. Strategic alignment, potential benefits, resource availability, project size, duration, and then technical difficulties or risks involved. These are all the criterias, or maybe these are some of the possible criterias. You may identify some other criteria or define other criterias as well. Some people do not bother about the cost. They say, I need this solution in any way. Whatever the constraints are there, whatever the problems are there, they don't bother with it. They say, we need to solve it. This is a quite rigid way. But again, it depends on how important is that. Now, for instance, if we look at value chain analysis, is the process of analyzing an organization's activities for making products and or services to determine where value is added and costs are incurred. Any company or any organization, they made some product. In order to make that product more attractive to the users, they add some values into it. For instance, when you go to, let's say, buy an internet connection to some telecommunication company like Saudi Telecom or Mobile, and you are asking them for an internet connection, to add certain value into it, they will also give you a small SIM. So you can have an internet package at home, not only at home but also at all the times you can use it with your mobiles. But you are paying, by adding little extra cost, that is giving you more benefit. So value chain analysis, you have to look into those things where you can actually add things more into the product and make it more beneficial for the users by having least possible costs. But if you go to these companies, maybe they can charge you for a small SIM, for an internet SIM, for, let's say, unlimited package. They can charge you even more for that. So separately that can cost you more. But when they are added into an existing product, it enhances its value. Okay. So this is one criteria when you are going to select certain project to develop. Other criteria are, for instance, resources availability. For instance, let's say this guy has identified a wonderful project, but unfortunately the resources required to develop or work on this project are not sufficient. They are not available. So our selection is conditionally met. So maybe some other guy identified another project, but that is not beneficial for us that much as his project. But we are selecting his project because it requires less cost, it requires less resources, it requires less time, right? So this selection is dependent or connected with certain other parameters. Similarly, project size or duration or technical difficulties, I can say, since this guy has identified a wonderful project, if we initiate, if we start or develop this project, we can be billionaire in months. But the failure of risk is very high. So if we are not ready to take risk, we can say no, we cannot go for your project, we can go for another. So selection is now based on the risk. Maybe technically some projects are not sound, some technical difficulties to implement them they can come across. Okay. Okay. You can see here a simple diagram which is showing you raw materials for the products. They are transformed into the products, and after transforming we need to market them. These are all strategic plans on which the organizations or some company's business is dependent. right? So marketing type of stuff, in fact, is not a part of the development, but ultimately it has to go through. So you should have a, a highest level of overview, of view of a certain organization in order to understand their business. If you do not understand the business from the top level, it is really difficult to identify the projects within different domains of that business and then to select them and start working on them. So from top to bottom, from the raw materials until it is market, we need to look at all different phases where we can input in terms of identifying a certain project. Now, third step. The first was, what was the first step? Identification. Then classification and ranking. Once the rank is defined, we are able to select. But this selection is again based on certain parameters. For instance, we can say both short and long-term projects are considered in this selection. Most likely to achieve business objectives. Let's say his project is very good, but unfortunately, even if we start, it's too big, too huge, but unfortunately for some reasons it does not meet the business objectives of a company. But he has identified a small project, but luckily it requires less cost, it requires less resources, but also meet the objectives of the business. So I would prefer to go for it when I need to select it. Now, if you look at this diagram, you can see here the project selection decision. Whenever you need to decide something, there is a certain outcome of that. Now that outcome of the decision, it can either be accepted or rejected. If it is neither accepted nor rejected, it may be delayed for some time. Maybe the decision is to refocus, or maybe the decision is to develop an end user product. Like if you go for Mobile or STC, they have developed certain end user different applications. For example, STC's in-VN service. They provide a TV service at homes with fibers. So they have gone through, they might have gone through and have studied extensively before launching that application, that product into the market. They must have identified the risks involved, technicalities involved, right? But another thing, but you can see there that project selection decision may or may not be influenced by these external factors. For instance, existing and available resources, perceived and real needs. Maybe in the beginning I perceive something different, but in reality the need of the user may be different. So this can also influence in selection of the project. Similarly, list of potential ongoing projects. if I already have a long queue of the projects over which I am working, so I can decide that since I have already, or I am working on already some projects, so I cannot select this project at this time. So my decision, either reject it, or maybe I can say, okay, let's delay it until I finish the existing projects. Then current organizational environment where we want to use it. Now, when you talk about organizational environment, there are certain things. It depends on the users for whom you are going to develop. It depends on the platforms, what different platforms are available in terms of operating systems, in terms of strategic plans, and so on. Evaluation criteria that we have already seen. So this decision is influenced, or may not be influenced, by all these things. Now we go a bit further. Since we have to do selection, we have to adopt a certain criteria that can classify and rank the projects. Once they are ranked, we will be in an easier stage. We can quickly go through. For instance, look at this formula. Let's say there are certain solutions. Solution A, solution B, and solution C for a given problem. We are confused. Which one should be selected? We define a formula, and according to that formula, we can calculate a score for those three solutions. And all the solutions are proposed for the same problem, suppose. So to solve that problem, I cannot say that I would go for all of them. I will adopt all the solutions and then will remain confused which solution should be used. So I need to select one of them. That selection will be based on the score formula, which is based on certain ranking and certain rating and weightage. At the end of the day, whatever the solution would have the highest score, that would have the highest probability of selection among the multiple alternative solutions. And finally, we add them, and highest score is going to win. Now if you look at this table, we have defined certain criteria. These are the requirements of the problems, and these are the constraints. Requirements are, let's say, real-time data entry, automatic reorder, real-time data query. These are the requirements. Constraints are developer cost is one of the constraint, hardware cost, operating cost, and ease of training. So to solve that problem, we have identified certain requirements and constraints. Along with that, we saw that this guy says, if you follow my solution, that is better. The other guy says, if you follow my solution, that is even better. The third guy says, no, my recommendations are better and that can be followed. Now I am confused. So what I will do, I will try to calculate the score that we saw in the previous slide. Here we are given some weights. Each requirement is given a weight. Let's say 18, 18, 14. Each constraint is given a weight 15, 15, 15, 5. You might be confused that how these weights are assigned. Are these random numbers? No. Or they are some sequential numbers. I can say this is 18, 18, 18, 20, 22, 24, 20 and so on. No, even not. These are subjective. It can be based on systems analyst. He say, in fact, weightage of a certain requirement and a weightage of a certain constraint, it shows us that how important is this requirement. So for example, we say that these two requirements are equally important for us. So they are given equal weightage, 18, 18. But 18 is based on the numbers assigned by system analyst, users, or maybe the managers or higher ups. So all of you can give a number that how important is that. So I can say, now there are too many numbers. I have to assign only one number. So what I will do, for simplicity, I can take an average. Okay. Based on that average, I can assign a weight to a certain requirement. Okay. Similarly, we can also assign a weight to the constraints, right? But if you look closely, you should keep in mind that when you are assigning these weights to the constraints and to the requirements, the total sum should be 100% for both. Right? So this means out of 100, this requirement has a weightage of 18%. It has 14%, 15, 15. And the last constraint, it has a 5%. Now what does that mean? If I compare two constraints with each other, what do that mean? One constraint is given a weightage of 5 and the other constraint is given a weightage of 15 out of 100. I can say, okay, since this constraint is not that much important, so I may overlook that constraint. Even if it is not met, I would not bother to care about that. But recommendation is you should always take care of the constraints. So in fact, these constraints should not be violated. If you violate the constraints, this means you are putting the outcome of the system on stake, right? So that cannot be feasible. Now, rating is also given. You see, rating is given 5, 1, 1, 4, 4, 5, 5. Rating is also subjective. Everyone say, okay, let's, what is your rating on a scale of from 1 to 5? He says 1. He says, no, this constraint, this requirement is very important, so he can scale it as 4. He says, no, this is the most important. He can scale it on 5. So all of the entity or the people, the developing team, analysts, managers, they are going to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 and then we will take an average. So everybody will rate each requirement and each constraint on a scale from 1 to 5, and for simpler reasons we will take an average. Now you tell me that what do you understand by if the rating is 1 or 5? What does that physically means? What is the significance? 1 means it is the least important for us. Even if the requirement is not met, no problem. But 5 means this is highly important. So this gives us. Okay. So we have given certain all the constraints for all alternative solutions. Now what happens after given weightage and rating? Based on these two factors, we calculate their scores. And these scores are calculated for each requirement. 18 times 5 equals 90. 18 times 1, 1. So for alternative A, we have calculated certain scores for all the requirements and for all the constraints. Similarly, for alternative B constraints, and then for alternative C. Now we have the scores available with us. Now if I ask you guys to have a look on these tables, on these numbers, and let's start doing analysis, and then based on your judgment, you guys tell me that which is the best solution that you can choose. Option C has a total of 413. This sum is calculated by summing up the totals of requirements and constraints, right? Now if you look at this 415, look at this 342, so from these numbers it is very much clear that option C is the best option. So let's select this option and start developing this project, start working on it. But sometimes, these are just calculations based on different opinions, because this guy says this is important for me, so I am rating it as a 5. This guy says no, this is least important. So we have a very different kind of mixtures of opinion. But when it comes to reality, then we may not select option C. Maybe I can still go for option A. I can still select option A. What do you think? What could be the possible reason to select option A? 342. This is a score, not a cost. It's a score. This has the highest score in the constraints, yes. Having high score in the constraint, what does that mean? No. I think you are misunderstanding somewhere. Having a rating of 5 for requirements, this means This is extremely required functionality of our system. If this is missing, our system will remain incomplete, right? But rating of 5 for the constraints, what does that mean? Having rating 5 for the constraints, what does that mean? That means the constraints abide by the constraints abide by the conditions. They do not violate at all. So if the constraints value is closer to 1 or 2, that means they have a high chances of violation, right? So I can consider this point of view, but again, this is not based on my single opinion decision. I must have to discuss it with my top management, that which solution I should go for. So I can say, since the score is least possible, but if you compare the constraints values with others, this is the best solution that have the lowest possibility of violation of constraints, because the score is high. If the score is too low, for instance, look at 180 for option C. Look at 180 for option C. What does that mean? There are high chances of violation of constraints. This means whatever I can say, oh yes, definitely operating cost is very high. Even if I develop, nobody can feasibly or economically afford this. For instance, STC has developed a certain product, let's say some internet package or landline calls, Jude 1, Jude 2, Jude 3, Jude 4. Now when they come into the market, if they develop these products with a high cost, so what would happen? Nobody is going to buy it. So this means operational cost must be low. So for this, you can see operational cost is, for instance, for option C is 75. But operational cost for option A is also 75. But you know, when decision is made, it is not based on single requirement or based on a single constraint. You have to keep in mind a collective study. Sometimes, okay, this was one reason that I can go for option A, because the constraints score is very high. This means there are least possible chances of violation of any of the constraints. But on another way, if I only look at the values of requirements, don't consider constraints, which one do you think is good one? Huh? Then options B and C are good options, right? Score of 250 for both, when you compare them with a score of 122. So what does that mean? The requirements more appropriately met within the development of this project. But still I can go for option A with the lowest score. Why? Because for those requirements whose rating is 1, that means these are those requirements which are least possibly met, right? But fortunately, the cost to develop these requirements is very low. So I can keep in mind, based on my budget, since these two requirements, they meet very low cost, so that is why I can still go for option A, right? And they are least, also they are least important, and they do have least possible cost involved. You might be wondering that the information of cost in requirements is not given anywhere. So why am I saying that they have the least possible? It is an assumption for us. When you are actually working as a system analyst or as a manager or as a project manager on a project, you understand the costs, resources involved, required. You understand everything, and based on your understandings, your assumptions, you take a decision. So, having this chart, you can better understand what type of project should be selected. So, if you guys have any questions? Yes.
Why did you say you choose that? You didn't choose alternative?
Why did I choose alternative?
Yes, the main reason.
Decision. I decide that, for instance, I can say,
What is the better option? A or B or C?
you know, from the scores, it is clear that option B and C are the best.
Why? You said
Yes, I said why A. A means I am considering some assumptions here. I have some pre-assumptions that those requirements which are least important for us, because they have the rating of 1. Since they have a rating of 1 and ultimately their score is very low, so I can say, since this requirement is not that much important for me, so let's remove it. Rather, I go for a solution whose cost, if I go for this solution, you can see here that in these solutions, the same requirements have a high score. Now they have made it rating very high, but luckily the cost is low. So I would say that for this solution the cost is very low. That is why I can go for option A, but for them I cannot go,
so you said
because these solutions may have higher cost. So the decision, again, you should understand, it is not that clear. It is not only based on a score we are calculating. Whatever is apparently visible may or may not be in the final selection.
so in cost ratio B and C is the best.
Yes, I can say that since I have a very limited budget, I cannot go for the solution B and C, maybe not only because of the cost but also because of the time. That may take longer times to complete. I can say I need the solution earlier, so no worries. Even if it has the less score, I can go for it because I need the system in hand early. How, I mean,
Now, calculating these score does not necessarily means that you must select on the basis of the scores you have calculated. In fact, these scores help us. They support our decision making. Right? I can still select the project without having all these calculations. I can simply say, oh, I don't need to go for anything since I have a very limited budget. So let's go for the least expensive solution. Right? So these numbers help us in making our decisions. But again, we do not need to necessarily follow them. You still have, as a project manager or as a system analyst, you still have your decision making power with you. But as I said earlier, that when you are selecting based on these numbers, we have seen here earlier, if we go here, that these are possible outcomes. They can influence our decision. Right? Do you get my point or no? Did you get the point? Now any one of you voluntarily, if would like to review the whole identification and selection process of any project. Before I go any further, so we will stop here today. But before we go any further, you should have some revision. So what we did in the beginning, we identified different projects. Then this identification may be based on two different approaches, either top down or from bottom up. Those who are identified by the top management, they are larger in scope and they may be longer in duration. Because they have more wider vision, they are more widely applicable. But those which are identified from the bottom to top, they would have less wider scope. They may be less in duration, and also they may be less applicable in different, right? After development, now after identifying, what is the next step? Sorry? Ranking and classification. Classification and ranking. Now, this ranking is based on certain criteria. What are those criteria? Risk, okay, and project size, duration, yes, and meeting your goals, okay, maybe cost, and I can say, okay, it is the since this project has the highest in possible cost involved, so let's rank it as lowest. So I would go for the project that requires less possible cost and that also meet maximum requirements and also do not violate constraints. So decisions are are very it's a kind of mix kind of thinking. You should be highly expert. You should understand from top to bottom at every level what are the risks, what are the possibilities. Because if you do not understand the business, organization, development procedures, you cannot take the decision. So after ranking, so based on these ranking, we can select that project, which one suits our needs. And what was the approach? We have followed one technique in order to select among the multiple possibilities, multiple alternatives. What was the technique? Yes, we have assigned weights after identifying requirements for all possible requirements and constraints, and then we have given rating for each alternate solution. Okay, and then you multiply the rating with weightage, calculate its score, and then based on the value of a score I can select the project. But again, this selection is not that straightforward, that having high number, let's select the highest project. No, it is again depends on certain parameters, and which those this decision may be influenced by the available resources. For instance, we have seen here in this option, in these calculations, that an option C with a total score of 430 was the best possible option. But I cannot select this project. My decision may be influenced by the available resources, because if the resources existing or available or required resources are not available for that solution, then I cannot make my decision that I would go for that option. So what I would have to do, either look for an alternate solution, or I would say, since I do not need this project immediately to start working on it, so let's delay it until we gain all possible resources. So we can also delay. So that is why the outcome of the decision, either accept, reject, delay, refocus the project, that we need to again analyze things. Maybe the requirements or constraints are not properly or completely identified. Some hidden parameters may not be taken care, which can have great influence in decision making. So we can refocus on the project. So let's start analyzing or doing your planning things again. End user development. I can say, I must have to develop a product that can be used by an end user. For example, in VN application developed by STC. I don't know if it is developed by STC or they have borrowed from somewhere else, from the third parties or whatever. But the thing is, that is an end user. You can watch TV at homes using that application. You can navigate through YouTube while sitting at your TV instead of browsing. So, in another word, if you see, the last outcome is the proof of concept. Our decision, if I say I must go for this option, no matter the time, no matter the cost involved, I say yes, I must follow this alternate solution. Why? Because the outcome of my decision is I would select this project, but I would not directly start developing the end user product. That require more cost, more time, more resources. There are higher risks. So let's first develop a proof of concept that what this guy is offering us. So let us see if we can develop that system on a small scale, a prototype like a prototype, and that prototype may present us that the concept this guy has given us is really possible to implement. So let's start thinking on a large scale in order to produce end user product, right? So we close our discussion for today, and we go for inshallah we will meet in the next lecture.